Thank you all for being here today, and thank you, Josh, for those songs. I think they went very well with the discussion at hand, and appreciate when the song leaders take the time to carefully select songs that do that. I think it helps fill out our worship as we focus on thoughts together. And I'm also one responsible for not having the monitor on, so it was a good thing that I got called on to do that. Jonathan reminded me to check the monitor, and from the time I was back there to the time I got up here, I forgot. So, thank you, Jonathan. You tried. This year's theme is to loving God with all our heart, soul, mind, and strength, and our neighbors as ourselves. And Matt, in particular, has been focusing his lessons on that. And this lesson should go along with that as well. In August, I presented a lesson from a very short section from the sermon, Jesus' Sermon on the Mount, and it was talking about anger and murder, and anger being the heart of murder. And that lesson is available on our YouTube channel if you'd like to check that out. Don't forget to smash that hit and like. And today I'd like to present another lesson from that same small section of the Sermon on the Mount and talk about turning the other cheek. Before I get to talk about turning the other cheek, I just want to remind us of some of the background. I won't go through this as much as I did previous time. When Jesus said, "Do not think that I came to abolish the law or the prophets. I did not come to abolish, but to fulfill." That statement alone is foundational in understanding what comes after it. The fact that Jesus wasn't coming to undo the law, but to fulfill it. In this particular context, it's not so much talking about satisfying prophecy, although he does talk about prophecy. It's talking about filling to the full, or to fill full. Do not think that I came to abolish the law of the prophets. I did not come to abolish, but to fill full the law and the prophets. And so what Jesus was doing was showing how to live out and perfectly embody the complete realization of the law's intent, and in showing us, for us to be able to live out the law to its full intent. And so then he provides 6 examples, and the one we talked about previously was murder, and the one we're going to talk about today is retaliation. Think of these as case studies for the thing he just explained, what the law looks like, how we fill out in these particular case studies. And so then again, each case study followed a very repeated pattern. Jesus would say, "You have heard that it was said," and then he would follow that with a statement, and that statement would either be a direct quote from the Torah, or it would be a kind of a paraphrase of a command or a couple of commands put together, or it would be someone's interpretation of the command from the Torah, and then Jesus would say, "I say." So again, a repeated pattern throughout that section. And the question that we considered briefly last time was, what's the relationship between those two things? You have heard that it was said, and I say. We talked about this antitheses. That's something that scholarly people talk about. When Jesus said, "You shall not murder," you have heard that it said, "You shall not murder," he didn't say, "But I say it's fine, go ahead." That would be the antithesis of the statement. Jesus clearly didn't do that. The word used by the translators, "but," kind of sets us up to see it as a contrast, but that word can be translated multiple different ways, as you see on the screen, moreover or then. And if you use a different word, then you see it in a little bit different light. And so ultimately, I think what Jesus is doing here is he is filling out what that command was all about to begin with. There is something true going on, but it's pointing us towards something of a greater reality, and that's the whole way that wisdom literature worked. So the number 5 case study, as you list them in order, is this one, beginning in verse 38. "You have heard that it was said, an eye for an eye, and a tooth for a tooth, but I say to you." So there's the setup, that familiar pattern. You have heard that it was said, gives the statement that they have heard, and then gives his commentary on it. So what we have here is a statement from the Torah, and it's followed by 3 filling full examples from Jesus that all require some level of historical and cultural context to really understand what he was talking about. These aren't necessarily obvious to us. We may kind of scrunch up our face when we read it, not really necessarily clear what he's talking about, but they would have been very clear to his audience, the first century Jewish audience that was listening to this instruction. That doesn't mean it was easy to receive. What Jesus was saying was fairly radical, but they would have absolutely understood the context of the things he was saying. It would not have been confusing to them. So what I first want to do is talk about that first statement, an eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth. So an eye and a tooth for a tooth, that comes directly from the Torah. That is a direct quote. It's found at least, and if I didn't miss any, Exodus 21, Leviticus 24, and Deuteronomy 19. Exodus 21 says, "But if there is harm, then you shall pay life for life, eye for eye, tooth for tooth, hand for hand, foot for foot, burn for burn, wound for wound, stripe for stripe." And then the Leviticus passage adds fracture for fracture. And if I remember right, the Deuteronomy passage includes some subset but doesn't add any new information. So what we see here, this is a direct quote, an eye for an eye and a tooth for tooth, but it's not the full statement. So it's sort of a shorthand. So if you said an eye for an eye, everyone knew that included all these other things. But we were just given a lot of detail in the law. And so an eye for an eye and a tooth for tooth had become a shorthand version for understanding that full extent of the law there. Incidentally, this idea is found in other ancient law codes. Probably the most well-known one is the Code of Hammurabi, which actually predates the Torah by a few centuries. Interesting point about the Code of Hammurabi was that it was not always applied the same. If I did something to someone who was of an equal status as me in society, equal wealth, then it was an eye for an eye. If I did something to someone who's lower, if I broke out the teeth of a poor person, then I just had to pay a fine. And so we see even in God's law, there's an elevation where there is more of an equality than some other societies. And this can sound a little barbaric to maybe the modern reader, some modern readers, modern sensibilities. I said not all. Some of us are thinking, yeah, we should do more of this. Our society would be much more orderly if we did more of this. But to some of us, it sounds a little rough. So there's a couple things to recognize. Number one, this law, an eye for an eye, tooth for tooth, describes a proportional and reciprocal punishment to be carried out by the court, not the individual. That's a critical distinction. This is not something that the law was not talking about an individual eye for eye, tooth for tooth. It was talking about the court enacting punishment, eye for eye. And our modern law code and many modern law codes are based on this concept of proportional Proportional means of the same level, okay, proportional, the same amount, and reciprocal means you did it and then you get it back, okay? So those are the two parts of that. The other critical point is that this law is provided as a limit to punishment. That is, the punishment in kind, that reciprocal punishment, is the maximum penalty allowed. So when it says an eye for an eye or tooth for tooth, that's the maximum that can be enacted by the court. So those two things are critical. So this was a precept about justice, not revenge. This law limited retaliation for injury and damage and was in place to ensure against escalation of personal retribution. So in other words, you knocked out my teeth, I'm going to kill you. Or you insulted me, so I'm going to knock out your teeth, and because you knocked out my teeth, I'm going to kill you. You can see how it very quickly escalates and becomes to the time of Noah, where the earth was filled with violence. This law was enacted to make sure that it didn't happen. It put a cap on what the punishment could be. So that explains an eye for an eye and a tooth for tooth. And now I want to actually go through the filling full examples, and I'm going to take them in reverse order because I think the 2 and 3 actually help undergird, help support, and understand what's going on with the first one. So I'm going to go in reverse order. So let's go to the first one, talking about going the miles. So the third one there, if anyone forces you to go 1 mile, go with him 2 miles. And this is the origin of our modern idiom, going the extra mile, meaning to do more than is expected or to go above the minimum requirement. And I'm sure many of you know that this refers to the ancient practice, the first century law that permitted a Roman soldier, the Jewish people were under Roman occupation, it permitted a Roman soldier to compel someone, either a citizen or non-citizen, they could also compel Romans to do this, to carry loads for them to up to 1 Roman mile, which is 1,000 paces, so it's a little bit short of our modern mile. And it wasn't simply going for a stroll with a soldier. So if the soldier walked up and said, I'm going to compel you to go a mile with me, it wasn't about just going for a walk. It was carrying their stuff. And as I understand it, their stuff was pretty heavy. And so they could compel anyone that they come across, you're going to carry my stuff for a mile. All right? And this was much more than a mere inconvenience. It would be very inconvenient if you're walking on level ground, carrying a lot of stuff. If you can do that in about 20 minutes, you're doing pretty good. And then you got to walk back to where you started. So you've probably killed close to an hour, plus you're exhausted. But it's much more than a mere inconvenience. This Jewish audience was a harassed and degraded people living under an oppressive occupation for decades. And so being forced to carry the burden of your oppressor was an insult that added to the injury of being someone who was under oppression. And they deeply resented this law. The Jewish people deeply resented being compelled to do this. And just note that this impressment, that's what this law was called, impressment, occurred publicly, and this intensified the insult. I guess I can't say with absolute surety that it was always public, but it's probably hard to walk a mile carrying a Roman soldier's stuff without somebody seeing you and knowing exactly what's going on, okay? And that would have been deeply shameful for this audience. So notice that Jesus did not call for forceful resistance. Jesus did not say, if a Roman soldier compels you, fight back. Jesus didn't say that. Jesus did not call for passive resistance. Passive resistance has been used by many to say, I'm going to stand, I'm not going to fight back, I'll allow you to haul me into the court or prison or whatever, but I'm just going to passively resist. Jesus didn't call for passive resistance. Jesus did not call for humble submission to the minimum requirement. Walk the mile, don't talk back, do it with a good attitude, but no more. Jesus didn't call for that. Jesus turned this whole situation upside down. When you are compelled by your Roman oppressor to walk a mile, you walk 2 miles. He called for proactively engaging, not passively, proactively engaging the oppression by asserting dignity and willfully choosing to go the extra mile, by treating that Roman oppressor with grace, with generosity. And again, people would see you doing that. I just asked the question, would that have any impact on the soldier? After you've carried their stuff for a mile and they're expecting you to put it down and walk away in disgust, and you say, you're going another mile, I'll carry it for another mile. Might that have an impact on that soldier? Might it have an impact on others who see you doing that? Might not. Even if it doesn't, it's still what Jesus was calling on you to do. This writer, Anna Case Winters, I should mention at this point, this is a good time to remind you that I credit the Bible Project as a resource for a lot of the thinking on this, and there's a couple other people that I will cite here. So Anna Case Winters observes that this may appear to be a person in the passive victim role, but it actually makes that person an agent who asserts power in a way that is positive and unconventional, what might have been a humiliation is met with a dignity-asserting act of giving. Instead of me being humiliated, I'm giving. I'm choosing proactively to give. And an implicit invitation to the enemy, aggressor, or importuner, that is the annoyer, to a different kind of interaction. It totally changed that interaction. What about this next one? This is number 2. If anyone would sue you and take your tunic, let him have your cloak as well. Again, for the modern reader, a little bit inaccessible. We don't really quite get fully what's going on here. And there's a couple things going on at least. Number 1, except for the wealthy, a cloak, the outer garment, like a robe, and a tunic, the inner garment, was your entire wardrobe. For many common people, definitely for the poor, if you had a cloak and a tunic, that would be all you had. You didn't have a closet full of clothes. I'm probably not alone in looking in a closet full of clothes and thinking, man, I got nothing to wear. That was not these people. They recognized that's what they had. So that's important to understand. It's also important to understand that the Torah, the law, permitted a cloak to be taken as collateral. So you owe money and you can't pay it, the cloak could be taken as collateral or a pledge. But it had to be returned before sunset so that the owner had something to cover themselves. It's going to get cold at night, and they need that because they don't have anything else to cover themselves. You see the references there. Specifically in Deuteronomy, it says, if he is a poor man, you shall not sleep in his pledge. It's talking about his cloak. His cloak is his pledge. So again, this is not somebody just walking to you up on the street and saying, give me your cloak. This is what occurs in a law situation. Someone is suing you, and they need that collateral or asking for that collateral. I said, this appears to be a case of one so heartless and greedy as to oppress a poor person with an unjust lawsuit to demand their inner garment. And I put question mark because the Luke account reverses the clothing order. If someone wants to take your cloak, then give them your inner garment. So I'll say I'm uncertain, but if the person is demanding your inner tunic, then they're doing something that I don't think the law allows. You're allowed to ask for the cloak, but not the inner tunic. But just imagine asking for someone's, what you might call their underwear, and what is really being asked of this person. Again, this is something done in public. This is a courtroom setting where a lawsuit is being brought. So what is Jesus' instruction? Not only allow your inner tunic to be taken unjustly, if that's the case, voluntarily give that greedy oppressor your outer cloak as well. So question, if a poor person with only one set of clothes gives his tunic and his cloak to his oppressor, then what is he now wearing? I don't know that Jesus is calling for them to be completely naked, but at the very least, this would place the person, this poor person who's already disadvantaged in society, of unthinkable society dishonor and extreme vulnerability. We live in a society that, for a large part, has lost the ability to blush. Partial nudity is not even thought of, and full nudity is hardly thought of. That was not the case in the first century. To be disrobed, to be unclothed in public was unthinkable. People would basically rather die than to have that happen to them. And what is Jesus saying? You do this, and you do it willfully. You make a choice to do it. Again, what appears to as a victimhood is actually a demonstration of remarkable strength, to willingly choose to suffer that indignity. And think about the dynamic of you and this person who is your greedy oppressor. They have the gall to put you in this position, and then they are seen for what they are in contrast to your radical generosity of the one who's oppressed. All right, so look at the first one then. Again, I think what we see in the second two helps support what's going on in the first one. So if anyone slaps you on the right cheek, turn to him the other also. So I asked Micah to come up. Micah, if you can come up and do a demonstration here. I'm not going to slap Micah on the cheek, just so you know. A couple things. One, it notes specific language. Micah's right cheek, okay? It didn't say this cheek, Micah's right cheek. That's important. So Micah's the one I'm going to slap. And I'm standing here, and this is a right-handed dominant society. You know, our culture is pretty much the same way, 90%, but everything was right-handed. So in this case, I'll be right-handed, even though I'm actually left-handed. So I'm going to slap Micah, and I'm going to slap him on the right cheek. What do I need to do? It needs to be, slow motion, it needs to be a backhanded slap, right? Now, even in our society, we understand that slapping is not your go-to choice for an assault. You can clearly do damage if you're strong. But we understand that it's an insult, right? Let me slap somebody. If a man is inappropriate toward a woman and she slaps him, that's not to injure him. That's to say what you're doing is wrong. I'm shaming you for what you did. So continue the thought. So I hit him on the right cheek. Now, what was the instruction from Jesus? He said, turn me the other cheek. So turn the other cheek. Now, if I want to hit Micah, what do I have to do? I have to open palm slap this way. Okay, thank you, sir. So, even our own society will recognize that the intent, the purpose of the slap is not to injure. It's an insult. Even more so in this time. The backhanded slap was something that you did to someone lesser. It was essentially reserved for a servant or slave. I'm treating you as someone lesser. And Jesus said, well, we'll get to what Jesus said. Let me do it this way. The slap's purpose or intent was not physical assault, but insult. The backhand slap could demand a doubled fine. You actually could be fined for slapping someone because it was the severest public affront to a person's dignity. Again, this would be done in public because that's the whole point. You're trying to shame this person, trying to insult this person. That's the goal. So what did Jesus say? Number one, Jesus did not call for forceful resistance, wound for wound, eye for eye. Jesus didn't call for that. So if the person slaps you, slap them back. That would be eye for eye. Jesus did not call for passive resistance. I'm just going to stand here and you slap me, then I'll take that and I won't fight back. Jesus called for those in his kingdom who are publicly insulted in a manner that causes the severest affront to their dignity to proactively invite the opponent to do it again. Remember what Micah did? I slapped him on the right cheek, and he turned me his left cheek, giving me the opportunity to slap him again. But the dynamic has changed a little bit. I think this understanding is much more relatable, probably to most of us. I'm going to assume that most of us aren't getting slapped on any kind of regular basis. At least I hope not. But might it be that someone has ever insulted your intelligence? Maybe someone has insulted the way you think. Maybe specifically as we're thinking about this environment, the way you think about evolution and where we all came from. Insulting the way you think about that and the way you believe. Has someone ever said something that is demeaning to you? Again, this appears to put the person in the victim role, but it is exact opposite. Craig Keener said, first, turning the left cheek was a bold rejection of the insult itself. Second, it challenged the aggressor to repeat the offense while requiring that they now strike with the palm of the hand something done not to a lesser, but to an equal. You've slapped me on the right cheek. Now I'm going to turn you left. Treat me as an equal. You tried to treat me as a slave, but I'm not going to allow that. In other words, turning the other cheek strongly declares that the opposer holds no power for condescending shame because the victim's honor is not dependent on human approval. It comes from somewhere else. So just want to think about application. And I want to make as clear as I can my understanding of this. And as Steve might say, this is my current best understanding. I could be wrong. But I think Jesus is not, and I put it in yellow in a larger font and bold and underlined it to try to make a point of emphasis. I don't think Jesus is establishing a prohibition against personal self-defense. I've heard this discussed this way. You're in a parking lot, or you're at a sporting event, or wherever you are, and some guy punches you on the right jaw. Well, Jesus said, turn the other cheek, so punch me on the left. Based on everything we've said, I don't think that is in view at all. I don't think that's at all what Jesus is talking about. I'll also say that calling on people to do hard things and endure domestic abuse is not what Jesus is talking about. I'm sure I'm not alone in having very low tolerance for domestic abuse and a desire to see those people get beat up by a much larger, stronger person than themselves. And so you can see the importance of having a law that limits to proportional and reciprocal justice, because it would be really easy to escalate that. I don't think Jesus is talking about that at all. So I think what Jesus is talking about is calling on kingdom citizens to respond to insult in an unconventional way, or you might say a radical way. So let me use the example I went back to earlier. You're having an evolution discussion, evolution versus creation. You're having a debate, you're having a discussion with someone. And at some point, your opponent, or the person you're talking to, says, well, only an idiot believes in God. Fairy tales, Easter Bunny kind of stuff. They insult your intelligence. What's the most natural way to respond to that? Oh, yeah? Only an idiot believes that something comes from nothing. There, you've made your point. And that is exactly an eye for an eye. It's about the same. They called you an idiot, you called them an idiot, so it's proportional. It's reciprocal. I did back to you what you did to me. That's an eye for an eye, directly. Versus, you call me an idiot. Let me give you another point of why I believe that God created everything in 6 literal days. You call me an idiot again? Let me give you another point why I believe. You see the point? You're not responding in kind. You're turning the other cheek and allowing that person to call you an idiot again. Not in a ugly, nasty way, but by responding with what you believe that is going to invite more critical thoughts. Maybe another example is a little more relatable. I don't know how many of us get in debates on any kind of regular basis with evolutionists about evolution and creation. How about this one? Don't raise your hand. Do you have anyone in your life that is terrible at returning text? You send them text, ask them about something, check on them, you never hear anything. But yet, when they text you, usually when they want something, you respond right away, and then 2 weeks later, you send them a text, no response. What's the, sometimes when they text you, what may be your temptation? I'm not going to text them back either. Let's see how they like it. That's eye for eye. That's the same thing. It's the same level. They didn't text me, I won't text them. And it's done in a reciprocal way. That's exactly eye for eye. I think as we understand it in this way, we see that this teaching is in harmony with other New Testament teaching. Romans 12, repay no one for evil Never avenge yourselves. 1 Peter 3, do not repay evil with evil or insult with insult. Repay evil with blessing. Specifically, if you're talking about persecution for what you believe, for supporting Jesus, blessed are you when they revile you and persecute you. And I don't think it's any, mistake. I don't think it's any, I can't think of a good word. The next thing he talks about in this context, he goes on to talk about your treatment of enemies. And I don't think that's a coincidence. That's the word I was looking for. I don't think that's a coincidence. I'm always amazed at Jesus' economy of words. You know, he says something, and then people make whole sermon series about it or write books about it. So he said this, and I'm going to kind of put together, fill out what I think was being communicated here. You have heard that it was said, an eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth. Rightly so. This law of proportional punishment enacted by a court was necessary to prohibit violence from escalating due to personal vengeance. Moreover, I say to you that at the root of this law is a heart that does not seek retaliation when wronged. So I say that if someone insults you by slapping you on the right cheek, offer him the other. If your opponent publicly insults you by suing you in court to take your tunic, give him your cloak as well. And if your oppressor publicly humiliates and insults you by compelling you to carry his burden 1 mile, bless him by carrying it 2. In so doing, you fill to the full this law. Jesus came to fill the law to the full, to show us what it looks like. Law was given, and then Jesus came along and said, this is what this law was really all about, and this is how you fill it to the full. And that's for all of us. All of us who would be or claim to be citizens of the kingdom of Jesus, that's what he's called us to do. And in many cases, it is the exact opposite of the way we would think or act. And that's the kind of thing that Jesus has called us to do. Thank you for listening. We're going to sing a song in closing. The intent of that is just an opportunity for anyone who needs to communicate some desire or need. If you want to commit your life to Christ, or if you would ask for us to pray with you or come alongside and help you with the burden that you're carrying, we invite you to come to the front while we stand and sing.